Hello and welcome along to another end of season review episode from Dorking Wanderers with me, Daniel. It's the end of season 2 and we're back for our second edition in this series. A massive thank you for your support with the first one. It seemed to go down really well and I really enjoyed showing you the in-depth side of the game. Little areas that we focus on off the pitch that I don't often get to show in normal episodes. The idea of this series is to show you the bits of the game that I always miss from other series, the bits that I wish I knew and the bits that I'm most invested in when I'm playing the game myself, and hopefully to give you a bit of an insight in how we run the club overall, particularly in this type of one club series where we're trying to build a club from top to bottom. So we're going to go through a couple of things today, and we talked about them earlier in the season, but they've also been partly given away by the fact that we're starting on the squad screen, and it's particularly important because of the situation we're in this season and how we finished off the campaign. So if you have missed any of the first 2 seasons of this story so far, please do go back and catch up on the eye above. I've really had a great time with Dorking Wanderers, and of course season 2 finished with great success. A massive thank you to everyone that left feedback from the last season review. I'm really glad that you found it useful, and as we say, it's not really a review as such, it's more of a guide talking about areas in depth, focusing on a couple of aspects each year and hopefully giving you a bit of an insight to how we manage a club. If you are enjoying the series and are looking forward to another one of these review episodes, please do put a thumbs up on the video. I can assure you it does make a massive difference and I really do greatly appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel for daily FM20 content. We've got our head coach series starting on Monday, just 3 more days to go. It's our journeyman story combined with a director of football challenge, and if you haven't seen either of the previous 2 editions, it's certainly one worth getting excited for. Of course, we've got the final episode of our beta save with Luton Town tomorrow. That's going to be an absolutely pivotal one. And then on Sunday we start season 3 with a transfer special, and that's one of the areas we're going to be talking about today. So last season we talked about our transfer policy in general, and this season I want to go into something in a bit more detail. So I'm going to talk about adapting to a promotion or relegation as it may be, but in this instance of course we've won the National League South as the table confirms here, and we're going to be moving up to the National League but still using all of our old scout reports from throughout the season. So I'm going to show you how we try to adapt to moving up a level so we don't waste all of our budget on players that aren't good enough or ones that have been scouted for National League South level. I'm really keen on reading other Football Manager blogs or watching other YouTube series, and one of the problems I find is that when teams get promoted they often sign a lot of players and then realise they're not good enough, and part of that is the star rating issues and part of that is from using old scout reports. So we're going to talk a bit more about how we alleviate that problem, how we make sure it doesn't affect us too badly. Of course you're always going to get the odd one wrong, it is a little bit unpredictable, but we'll talk about how we try to reduce the risk and make it as small as possible for the club. We're also going to talk about individual training, something that's really important with this very young squad we've got, and I'd imagine it's going to be our blueprint moving forward, particularly with our relatively small financial budgets. So that's something that's incredibly important, bringing players in and then trying to improve them. It's something I'll talk about in the head coach as well, and of course that's an area we have to focus on there. In that series we'll have no say in transfers or contracts, so we have to work with the players we're given, and here we're relatively limited in what we can do. We can't go and get big money signings in their mid-20s, so we have to try and adapt the players we have at the club, and I'll show you a bit more about how we do that individually. So we start on the squad screen at the end of the season, a bit like we did at the start of last season's review, and of course there we were talking about our transfer policy in general. At that stage it was very different, we just had our first year at the club, we were trying to get rid of a lot of the players we'd inherited and bring in a lot of new youngsters, so we're not going to talk about that as generally today. There will be a few slight bits that overlap, but more importantly we want to talk about adapting to a new division and some of the self-imposed rules we put in place for that. So there are things we do to try and alleviate problems, can of course cost us if our scouts have got things wrong, and in terms of coaching I'll show you the bits I go on gut instinct and some of the bits where I try to plan a bit more carefully. So the most important thing for me to start with is attitude always comes before ability. So one example of that today will be Lewis Binks. He's the 3rd choice centre half who's a really good youngster, plenty of potential, certainly good enough to be our backup centre half next year, but he's someone who's been unhappy all year, starting to go public with his concerns, and he's someone we just don't have time for at the club, even though he could potentially be a brilliant player. So he's someone who's going to go out and will rule out despite his talent, and that's something I'd always encourage to people, whether you're managing in non-league in real life, whether you're on Football Manager, is treat attitude as the most important aspect. Having a good group of people is more important than having a good group of talent. Talent comes second and a very close second, but attitude is always the most important thing. So we're going to start very quickly by following the rules we did last year, which is excluding all of the people that we want to get rid of. So the 3 loanees will be leaving, we don't need to worry about that. Fabio Lopez I'd like to keep, but I feel that decision may be taken out of my hands. So I'm just going to circle out people who won't be good enough or have been standout poor performers this year, just as we did in last season's review, and then we'll talk about the more in-depth bits. So we've gone through that process that we talked about and we found 12 players based on last year's rules, and I'll talk about how we got to those decisions just so you get a bit more understanding. So there's a couple such as McShane and Briggs who are obviously there as they were last year. They're not going to be good enough, but they're on pay-as-you-play terms, so if they want to stay at the club and not play at all, then we've certainly got no problems with that. Just gives us extra depth in case of a big injury crisis, something we haven't had at all this year. Our really strong physiotherapy team has shown, and we'll go and take a very quick look at that as well, because it's been baffling how few injuries we've had. I can't remember a season of FM in my history that's been like it. But there are some surprise names in there. So Fergal Hale-Brown is our first choice keeper this year. He's not on this list because I want to get rid of him, but he's a standout poor performer in terms of average rating, and he's someone who I know can't be first choice next year. So it's highlighted to me that that's a position I need to improve, and Fergal Hale-Brown can't be the first choice. As soon as we get a new keeper in who's better, he'll then come off the list and be back up. I've certainly no problem with him staying at the club. He's on a relatively modest wage, and that's all we're going to need at the next level. People like Joshua Platt and Jordan Ina are on there, not because we don't want to keep them, just because they're out of contract at the end of the year, and I can't see them signing new ones on similar terms. If we do, then we'll probably loan both of them out, as we're looking a bit more to the future now. We've got people like Arthur Reed on there, Emmanuel Adebayi, and a couple of the other youngsters, Ellis and Bailey. They're on there because they're youngsters at the club. Kevin Kavanagh falls into this category too. They're players who I don't think are going to get much football at National League level, and I don't think we can rely on at that standard, but I'd like them to stay at the club and develop, so we're going to try and loan all of those out. And then a couple on there such as Freddie Grant, I think he might be the only one on that list actually. Him and Louis Binks actually, the centre half, the only two I'm looking to sell permanently. There are a couple of other maybes we've left out. We talked about the 3 experienced boys, Richards, Gallagher and Pryor. If we're able to get a really strong level of competition in, I'm more than happy to let all of them go, but they're all either team leaders or highly influential players. If we go and look at the dynamics, they make up most of those groups. So we've got Gallagher at the top, and he's got a really good personality for tutoring as well. He's been great in mentoring groups before. He's helped the personalities of 4 or 5 players already, and he's really going to be crucial to us moving forward. He's also club captain, so I don't want to just sell him, but he has to accept being a backup player. In the highly influential group, we've then got most of the people we've talked about: Pryor, Richards, McShane and Hale-Brown. So that's why I don't really want to sell the lads, but of course we're not going to be able to give them much football. And then the 1 or 2 others in there are the likes of Arash Ahmadi. He's only good enough to be a backup at a push, but he's on such a low wage that it's not a priority position for me. 150 quid a week for a really average backup left back, not a problem whatsoever as long as we get a good first choice. So that's the bit we've done last year and an explanation as to the reasons for it, but now let's talk about adapting to the new level. If we go and look at our reports, of course you can see we've got good star ratings across the board, but that's something that's for National League South level, and unfortunately with the game where it gives you the end of season review in the end of June, and then the new fixtures come out for the next season, that's when you officially get made a National League club, and when all of these things change over. So normally that's around 2 months today, about the 24th, 25th of June, so until that date your reports will still show the National League South or North level, and that's going to make things very difficult for us as we don't know how good these players are in comparison. Of course we'll get a bit of an idea when we get our trialists in like we did last year, again going through exactly the same process. We go to the players rated 70 or above in the scout reports who are at top division teams, and then from there we'll just bring them all in on trial and hope they'll be able to be decent players. So we've got one there which is Luke Plange, I think that is, and then plenty of others going forward from there. You can see one from United there, one from Fulham just below. There's plenty of them going about, so we'll go through the same process with that. You already know that from last year's episode, and that may make some of these star ratings come down, which will help us make a decision, and it's one of the reasons I suggest to bring trialists in first, a system I never used to use myself, and I know a lot of you said you didn't use either. It really can be helpful because it tells you how good your players are. Once you've got to 2 or 3 weeks with the trialists and you see how good they are and see all their attributes, you'll then get a comparison between them and your players to understand just how much you need to step up. Of course, we're going a little bit on instinct too. We don't want to demoralise the squad we've got at the moment. They've done so well to go up, so we want to keep the core together. And even if we do sign vastly improved new signings, we'll try and blood them individually rather than just chucking all 9 or 10 in at once. We didn't really have a choice this year because we had 13 new additions and they were replacing really poor players, whereas this year we'll still have the decent ones at the club, so even if we get another 10 or 15 in, we're going to be able to bed them in sporadically. So next is probably one of the most important parts, and something I'd suggest to any of you who are playing a save like this. If you get promoted, particularly in the lower levels, your scouts and your coaches maybe only have ratings of 10 to 12. You want to be a little bit careful with their reports, so I always knock half a star off everyone. You'd imagine once a few new signings come in, you've probably seen it yourselves before when you get promoted. You sign 10 players and it clicks over to the start of the new season and suddenly everyone's rated half a star worse. So I get that out of the way myself and just bring them down to that level. So if I'm looking at Gallagher and Whelan in central midfield, for example, they're 2.5 and 3 star there. I'd probably knock them down to 2 and a 2.5 star, which suggests to me I might need to replace Gallagher. 2.5 is the minimum I really want in a team next year. Of course there are 1 or 2 who can play for the first few weeks until we bed our new players in, but trying to get our transfer business done early is harder when you get promoted, and sometimes you just have to be a bit more patient. It's good at this level because the expectation's not so great, so we can have a year of consolidation in the National League, but of course we still want to do the best we possibly can and keep the squad morale high and help everyone bed in quickly. So the key for me would always be to take half a star off, particularly once you get the try lists in. It may naturally happen anyway, but just remember it won't change till the end of June, until you get that fixture release for the new season and it officially changes at the top of your screen. You're always going to have the ratings for the league you're currently in, even if you've just won it and you know you're going up. So that's something I'm always very careful of and something I always try to keep an eye on. So when I'm doing my little paper sheet with my 2 players for each position, I'll normally take half a star off and show what they're rated as. So let's say Jason Pryor, for example, he's 2.5 star there. I'll write on my piece of paper he's my backup striker, but he's only 2 star ability. I know by the start of the season that'll almost certainly be the case, and I don't want to take any risks, and if they end up being better, then fantastic. The same when we get try lists in. Of course they're compared to our current squad and they can naturally change some of the abilities as a result, but they're still rated on National League South level while you're considered in that league, and you have to be careful of that. It's something that can be a huge shock for people. They're bringing players on trial, they've got brilliant scout reports, they've got a great star rating from the coaches, they sign them in May or the start of June when the transfer window opens, and in 3 weeks later they get the fixtures for the new league, they're officially put in the Vanarama National League, and then suddenly they realise they're only 2 or 2.5 star and all your hard work has been undone. You've paid them double the amount because you think they're going to be a big upgrade, and suddenly you end up with a player that's just as bad as your last one. If you don't get an upgrade, then of course it can leave you in a perilous position, and we want to try and avoid that as much as possible, though 1 or 2 will always slip through the net. So that's just a little bit about how we go about it when we're getting promoted. Of course, very similar to what we do normally. It's still a transfer window, there's only so much different you can do, but just some of the mitigating factors I try to put in place to prevent too many of those errors in signings. You see it so often, 10 or 15 players coming in, and 5 of them aren't good enough to get in the side. The last thing we want to be doing is spending 2 sets of wages on upgrades for a position, because then you feel duty bound to keep both. You're not able to get rid of the first one, he's joined the club too recently, and then suddenly you're getting rid of one of your stars from last year, let's say a Tom Richards or a Pryor for example, and they're players who are keeping the club spirit together, so we want to keep them even in backup positions. So it's something I'll try to do in the summer, and of course I could be proven wrong in 2 days. We've got a transfer special at the start of season 3, so you can let me know then if any of these 12 are still here, bar Fergal, Hale, Brown of course, and if any of the ones highlighted at the bottom aren't here, of course except from the loanees who will be leaving the club, who we could also probably include in that list. So there's that group of about 10 or 12 players, most of whom have made most of the appearances this season. They'll be the ones we want to keep at the club, just to keep that morale high and give ourselves players we know we can rely on. And then the second thing we want to talk about today, we'll go through the medical centre on the way of introducing it. We've really had no injuries this season. If we look at the season summary, no one more than 5 weeks, and he wasn't even at the club then. Aside from that, of our first choice players, we've only actually had 6 injuries according to that. I know a couple have left the club since, and they probably did have, so Stuart Lewis was one who wasn't available available much, but in terms of that, I've never seen anything like it. Let me know if you've had similar in your saves, because I know injuries are normally a bit of a problem. We've not had really any at all. I can't complain about it, but it means we're probably due a few next season, and that could be something that worries us. But let's move on to our training schedule. I want to take a look at individual training today. It's something I've focused on briefly in the past, but not really talked about in detail. With the natural season episodes, it's very hard to spend 5 or 10 minutes on it, so let's go and do that today. We'll put the players in list order so you can see what we're doing. So this is where your coaching team becomes really important, and we have now actually managed to find a coach to fill that spare coaching position at Dorking. I'm going to save it for the next episode as it is quite an interesting one, but he's a really good coach and it's going to help this enormously. It's actually allowed us to make a few changes to it just to make sure we're giving the best possible individual development to players. So if we go and have a look at our individual team, you can first see that almost everyone's assigned to a position or duty. We're trying to train them on an individual role which suits the formation of our team. It's something I used to be guilty of, and it infuriates me when I watch other series, is to see players put in their natural position in terms of right midfielder for example, but they're not put in a role they're comfortable with and watching them struggle for form. So you've got really good players but you're not taking advantage of their qualities. They're not there as a natural right midfielder, they're there as a natural winger on support. If you don't play them there, if you play them as a wide midfielder for example and give them defensive responsibilities they can't handle, they're naturally going to have a poorer rating and you're not going to get the best out of them, and you're also probably going to affect their morale and training performance. Training performance is something that's become really influential since it was introduced last year. Of course it shows how well people are developing, but it also does link quite nicely to morale and shows how happy people are at the club. Aside from match day, which we really focus on as managers, the rest of it we don't really see too much. So that rating really is a guide to happiness outside of matches, and if you draw in a few games, that could be the difference between happy or unhappy. So particularly next season where we'll be expecting to lose a fair few games, we've got to make sure we get this right. So everyone's working on a specific duty or role, so all of our central defenders working on central defender defend. A few of them aren't natural at that, so someone like Matt Ellis for example, he's naturally a stopper but we don't want that at the club, so we're training him on defend to get him as comfortable as possible. The same at fullback on defend, something that we often have to do. And the only one I really deviate from the norm is central midfield, and the reason for that is because box-to-box midfield is so useful. It trains so many attributes at once, and if we go back to the other view so you can see it, it trains so many of the key attributes for a midfielder that when I've got youngsters of 17 or 18 at the club, I'll normally put them on this one automatically. Even if it's not the role I want them to have in the future, let's say I want them to be a deep line playmaker, it pretty much trains all of those attributes anyway, but it also gives them so much more. So that's something I try to deviate from, but normally I'll just go on the attributes. Where do I want to improve a player? What role do I want him to be comfortable in? Once you get to 18 or 19, you're not going to get massive developments like that, so we want to make them suit our tactic and be as comfortable in our formation and roles as possible. So I guess in summary, the position role or duty training we use to get people comfortable with our tactic and our shape, so the additional focus really allows us to drill down to the attributes we want to improve, and for 17 or 18 year olds who can have quite a weird spread of attributes, particularly with regens in the future, it's something that really allows you to manipulate their development and ensure they suit the type of player you want them to be. So if we go back to a detail one for example, you can see we've got it on almost everyone at the moment, and that's where the coaching team comes into it. About a week ago we only had about half of these on individual focus, and that's because of the number of coaches at the club. I'd probably say you want a maximum of about 5 or 6 on individual focus per coach, and you can of course include your assistant manager in that. So with our assistant and our 3 coaches, we've now got 20 at the club, although 2 of those are of course with the goalkeeping coach. So we've got about 18 on for the rest of the team, and that allows us to focus on the ones we've got at the club. If we do more than that, we're just overloading the coaches, their workload goes up, and unfortunately they're not able to produce their best then, and if they can't give the time to the people in their rushing training, it does halt their development slightly. So you'll notice if you have one coach for example, and you put 3 players on individual focus, they'll improve massively and their progress will be very quick, but if you did the same and put 10 on individual focus, then it'll often be slightly stalled unless you've got an absolutely wonderful coach. So let's just pick a couple of examples of players. I guess Ethan Vaughan is a good example of one. So he's a really good young player. He's so solid defensively, but he had a real deficit in his game moving forward. So he's not something that's essential to a right back. He's a fullback on defend. He doesn't need to cross the ball. He doesn't need to be too attacking. He could just lay it off to the winger. But we want to get crosses into the box for our target man. So we've set an additional focus of crossing. It's something that wouldn't normally be covered by his defensive duty, but it allows us to improve certain attributes. So as well as crossing, it does also train technique, as you can see, something that's paramount to all the technical attributes, so it just allows us to develop his game a little more, something that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And again, if we take a second example, let's say Josh Georgie, he's the young winger that can play on both sides. He's naturally a winger, he just needs to get to the line and cross it, doesn't need to be too great at everything else, but we want him to be a better passer of the ball, we want to gradually play better shorter football, so we've got him working on his passing focus, and to show you that Shane's passing vision and technique, and vision and technique then naturally help crossing and his winger role as well. So it just allows you to manipulate the players into exactly what you want them to be. And with this sort of side where we've got players between 18 and 21, we're getting them as soon as they're released from Premier League or Championship academies. We need to look after them and try and develop them to make sure they get that same high level of training. If they don't develop, then they're not going to become good players. We're not going to be able to sell them on for as much in the future. And if we can't make that profit in the transfer window, this club is going to go bust very quickly. So it just gives you an idea as to how we use individual training and the two different aspects of it. Of course, there's role, position and duty training, and there's additional focus training too, but most of us have always just used them in assumption and not really looked at the differences they can cause. So the position, role or duty can be so important to your tactic, whereas the focus is so driven on one or two attributes that you really want to improve, and it allows you to do that individually, even if the role you want to teach them for your current tactic doesn't suit the attributes you want to improve. So we use them together where possible, just to try and develop the most complete players, and fingers crossed it's been working quite well so far. You can see with Ethan Vaughan's in particular, his crossing had gone up from 8 to 9, and that's the sort of thing we're looking for over a year. If we can do that, then we're really helping these players. We're making the side better, and they're improving as we go up the divisions, and it means hopefully, like we talked about earlier, their star ratings then won't drop over the summer. So of course a very niche look today at an element, particularly this individual training. It's something I know a lot of people don't use and they just assign to their assistant. I'll hold my hands up, I used to do it and I still do most of the time for general training, but I find the benefits you can get as a human manager when you're doing this for the individual training is so beneficial in compared to the team ones. I generally find that the assistants and coaches are quite good at managing the general training. They tend to focus on the right things and you don't often have to make tweaks, whereas individual training is often so far off the mark, you end up with 10 players working on penalty kicks just because they've all got poor ratings. But realistically, you don't need 10 good penalty takers, they're only going to be needed once in every 3 or 4 years. So a bit of a niche one, and apologies if it's not your sort of thing, but of course we've talked about the promotion and how we're going to adapt to that in the transfer market. Of course I could be forced to eat my words in the next episode, as we'll go through our transfer special on Sunday, looking forward to life in the National League and hoping we can find another batch of brilliant youngsters. Our scouts are working round the clock, although we did have that one vacancy, and that's making things a little bit more tricky, as we've not got quite as much manpower on the search. But the individual training is something I really wanted to show because it's so influential in the way our players improve, and it also shows how well the players adapt to our tactic. It works really closely with team cohesion. We've talked about how quickly it's gone up this year. It's now very good because everyone's training in their specific role and they all understand exactly how we want to play. But if you did enjoy this episode and another insight into a couple of areas of the club, please do put a thumbs up on the video. I promise I'll try to ignore transfers next year so we don't have 3 in a row focusing on the same area, but of course in the early years it is one of the most important ones and not something we'll talk about if we get to the Premier League. Once we get to that level where we can sign 30 or 40 million pound players, talking about our scouting isn't quite as important. This is a level with a very restricted wage bill where you can't afford to make those mistakes, and that's why it's so crucial we get it right, and that's why I've tried to talk about it at this stages, whereas training for young players is important throughout the series. Let me know in the comments what you think of it, how you use individual training. Do you do any more than I do? Is there anything you do differently, or maybe even any tips you have for me? I've just interpreted it my way and used it, and I've always found it to be greatly effective. In the last couple of years I've paid so much more attention to it, mainly to avoid failing all the time in YouTube series, and it has worked well so far of course, although this season was a little bit of a pleasant surprise. Then lastly, as we did last year, let's go and have a look at the leagues in England. Of course, we'll look at the cups for any more shocks as well. Arsenal won the Premier Division, taking the crown off City from last year. Liverpool missing out on the top 4 this season. They seem to have declined quite quickly. Everton sneaking into the top 7. They're going into the new Europa Conference. That's going to be interesting to see in game. Hopefully we'll get to play in it on our way up. See if it's something we're going to enjoy. On to the Championship, as most of the clubs going back down there. Swansea and Stoke relegated again, with Watford joining them at the second tier. Reading won the playoffs in the Championship. Norwich getting promoted again as champions. Brentford joining them. They seem to be doing really well in this game. They've been brilliant in our Luton save, and we'll have to take a look at the head coach as well. Oxford went back down. They've been joined by Millwall and Bristol City. Slight surprise there, Bristol City, I would say. In League One, Sunderland won the playoffs. That means my beloved Luton Town stay down. They did make the playoffs, but unfortunately lost out. Hull and Preston going back up to the Championship. Then going down, there's no real shocks there, so let's move on to League 2. And this is the first one that's going to affect us now, as we'll see who's been relegated down to the National League. Might get a really big game. Oh, Swindon have been relegated. That seems like a bit of a surprise. So they'll surely be favourites for the National League next year. Going up has been Blackpool, Carlisle, Wimbledon and Scunthorpe. Again, no massive shocks in that sense, but Swindon in non-league is definitely one for me. I don't think I've seen that in my lifetime. Let's go to the National League to find out who we're facing. Not Notts County, they've been promoted. They joined Dagenham and Redbridge going back up to League 2. Woking and Sutton narrowly missing out. Stockport, Harrogate, Braintree and Welling back down, so we won't face any of those sides next year. But we've got Torquay from FM19, I'll have to show you a game against them. And then the likes of Leyton Orient and Chesterfield, both pretty big sides at this level. Then on to the North, the last league we didn't feature in. Kettering won the title. They're making their way back and they're joined by Halifax, who bounced back at the first attempt to the National League. We'll be joined by both of them next season. Of course, that'll be very interesting to see. Going down is Kidderminster to the regional leagues. That seems like a little surprise. And then Bradford, Park Avenue, Hyde and Tamworth. None of them really unexpected. Then into our league, of course you know we won it. And we were joined by Dulwich Hamlet deservedly. They got 100 points. It would have been cruel if they didn't come up. Although Hammond and Waterlooville took them to extra time. We know the 4 that have gone down. Maidstone probably the biggest surprise. So a little bit of rebuilding to do for them. But that league's going to be pretty strong next year. Then on to the FA Cup, no Championship side winning this season. Of course, remarkably, it was Nottingham Forest last year. We will go and take a quick look at how they got on in Europe. But of course, Chelsea won it against Tottenham this season. Probably a bit more of an expected final. In the League Cup, Manchester City beat Chelsea. Again, no real shocks there. And if we go down to the Community Shield, unfortunately, Forest couldn't do it again. The Leasing.com Mickey Mouse Trophy was won by Sunderland. Of course, they won't be competing in it next season. And then Chesterfield won the FA Trophy, as well as staying down in the National League. So let's finish with the European Cup and Europa League, just to see how sides got on in there. Manchester City won the Champions League, really good performance from them. And then let's see who won the Europa League too. Hopefully it'll be another English side. Tottenham won it this season, so 2 English sides completing a clean sweep again. What we do want to do is go and look at Nottingham Forest though. How did they get on in the Championship? 13th place, and how did they do in Europe? They've got Joe Worrell as vice-captain. He's playing for us at Luton Town in our beta save, on loan with us for the season at the moment. So did they get out of the groups? Unfortunately they didn't, but they did pick up a couple of wins. They won away in Israel despite 3 defeats before it, a home against the Israelis as well, and a draw against Lokomotiv Moscow, so 7 points in their group. Not a bad return for a second tier side. But back to the dynamics, we'll leave it there. Subscribe to the channel for daily FM20 content from 2 long-term stories. In the meantime, we've got the finale of our FM20 beta save. That's with Luton Town tomorrow. Can we keep the club I support up? We've got 3 games left in the season to do it. So do make sure you come and join me for that one. Then on Monday, we've got the start of our head coach series. It's been brilliant for the last 2 years, and I think it's going to be a cracker. I've already recorded the first few, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. Well, this one will be back on Sunday with a transfer special. Then we'll be rotating our long-term stories every day. So on Tuesday, it will be the first day of the National League season, and then back on Wednesday with the head coach and so on. There's also 2 episodes a week from my Cricket 19 career. They're on Tuesday and Saturday at midday. But a massive thanks for watching this one and joining me for another end of season review. I really do appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time for another big transfer special as we try to sign a side that can cope in the National League.